To our second learning lab on the importance of the desk review in the context of using the UNHCR WFP Joint Analytical Framework, or JAF. As we know, the JAF is a set of tools which helps us to better understand the ability of refugees and other forcibly displaced people to meet their basic needs, be those food needs or non-food needs, and therefore informing the programming of both UNHCR and WFP. So we have colleagues from both agencies here today. Thank you everyone for joining. Here's a first poll to get us started and understand your familiarity with desk reviews. I'm just going to launch this first poll. Bear with me a second. Have you ever conducted a desk review before? Never, once, a few times, or I'm a total expert. So please fill in. Submit your answer. If you can't see the poll, you might find it in the chat. Okay, so I'm seeing a few answers coming in. Quite a lot of people have conducted a desk review a few times. Maybe one or two total experts. A few people have never conducted a desk review. 27% have never conducted a desk review. So you're in the right place because this is what we're going to be talking about today. And we have a great group of presenters, of experts and enthusiasts to tell us about desk reviews and to answer your questions. We'll have questions at the end of the presentation today. So welcome to Alicia Ortega. Alicia, can you give us a wave?
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Alicia. Guillermo, so Alicia from UNHCR. Guillermo Rodriguez. Hi, Guillermo. And Sahand Tahir from the Joint Hub. So both Guillermo and Sahand and myself, we're all from the Joint Hub, the UNHCR WFP Joint Hub. And I'll be facilitating today. My name's Olivia Collins. Let's go to the next slide. So the content and learning objectives for today, the webinar should last 45 minutes. And by the end of this learning lab, we hope that you should be able to describe the importance and purpose of a desk review, outline the process for assessing existing data and identifying gaps, identify sources that can be used in a desk review, and summarize how a desk review can inform data collection and analysis. And I'm going to launch another poll now. Why, in your opinion, is it important to conduct a desk review? Please select all that you think apply to understand what data we already have, so we don't waste time and money recollecting existing data. It's a donor requirement to reduce assessment fatigue for people responding to questionnaires, to better understand the context, to inform data collection. Please click on the responses. Okay, I'm just filling it in myself. Submitting. Okay, we've got a few responses coming in. Great. Okay. Yeah, excellent. So your responses are reflecting what I think is the right answer, that these are basically all good reasons, apart from, I would say, it's a donor requirement, because it's not usually a donor requirement unless you've specifically written it into your project proposal. But all of the other reasons are really good reasons: understanding the data that we have, not wasting time and money recollecting data, reducing assessment fatigue, really important. We don't want to be asking refugees the same questions, it's a waste of their time, and to better understand the context, informing data collection. So great, thank you, good answers. And now I'd like to hand over to Guillermo, who will talk more about the overview of about when we conduct a desk review, and then about the purpose of the desk review as well. Over to you, Guillermo.
Thank you, Olivia. Hello, everyone. I wanted first to show this process overview that we saw in our last webinar to make sure that we understand where exactly we're sitting. When we're planning to use the joint analytical framework to conduct a joint needs assessment, once we have defined the objectives of the needs assessment, this is, once we know where we need a needs assessment for, but right before we start enthusiastically to collect the data or even to define the scope of the data collection, there is where we need to conduct a desk review. A desk review is nothing more than a review of existing secondary data. This is what can we already know by simply looking at the information that is already out there. And regarding the purpose then of a desk review, I could say there are mainly two reasons to conduct one, two main purposes. First, to understand our knowledge gap, to understand what information we need that we don't yet have. The point here is that we want to make sure that we are not forgetting to collect any important information, while we are restraining ourselves not to collect data we don't need to avoid overburdening the data collection exercise. This is one. And the second is that the desk review can help us get a sense of what the local context looks like. What is the economic situation? What is the conflict outlook? What is the legal environment? What were the needs or vulnerability levels previously in other assessments? All this would be useful. Understanding the context will help us interpret better the data that we're planning to collect and have a better analysis of the data and the results and of what they mean once we've analyzed them. Those, I would say, would be the two main purposes. And now I give you back the floor, Olivier, for the steps to conduct a good desk review.
Thank you, Guillermo. Thank you. So, yeah, if we start to think about the steps and how we assess existing data and identify gaps, what's the process? I'd like to launch another poll. Bear with me a sec. So, if you have conducted a desk review before, how did you approach it? In a planned and organised way? We managed to work it out as we went along. In a disorganised way, or I've never conducted a desk review before? Please fill in the poll, and just to get an idea of your experience of conducting desk reviews and the way in which they were conducted. Okay, not so many in a disorganised way, that's good. And give it another minute or so. Please fill in the poll if you haven't already done so. All right, and maybe I hand over now to Alicia to tell us more about, just before we go there, about conducting a desk review, about the steps involved in conducting a desk review. Sorry, over to you, Alicia.
Thank you very much, Olivia, and hi, everyone. I am happy to see that 40% of the colleagues have already work in a desk review in a planned and organized way. Some of them, they have managed to do it where they were working. So yes, and some of them, they have never conducted a desk review. So yes, following this, we are going to see the different steps. So before that, I would like to say that as any other data process, is key that when we are going to conduct a secondary data review, we do in an organized way and follow with some specific steps. The steps that I am going to mention are the standard steps. The way that they are going to be implemented will depend a lot of the resources of each of the operation that is going to run the desk review. So we need to always consider that. So first, we are going to start with this joke that I think is reflect a lot the reality when someone, perhaps the assessment coordinator or a supervisor or a colleague is telling another, get all the information you can, we'll think of a use for it later. And yes, it's a joke, but to be honest, it's the reality. Perhaps we don't hear that in a direct way. No one in the field tell us this. But the reality is that when we don't have a very clear idea about what we want to do, or we don't want exactly what is our objective, something that happens very often because it's very difficult, honestly, to know exactly what we want when we have so many issues and we face so many crises in the field, that is the result. we get everything, or we try to get everything, and at the end, this is not useful. This is something that usually we link only to primary data collection, but it's important that we highlight that happens in secondary data review. Secondary data review can be a very, very long process. It's not very attractive because we don't go to the field. We stay in front of our computer for 9-10 hours by day. So it's very, very important since the beginning is clear what we are looking for. So we are going to review which are the steps. So as you can see, the steps are very similar to the step that we will follow for a primary data collection. First is to plan, which we already mentioned about the objective. Second is to collect and collate the data. It will be in a different way than what we do in primary data collection. We will explain later. We will draw the conclusion, which is the analysis from the descriptive part to more interpretative part with the expert. And the last point is how to share or what kind of information we can share. So the first step is to plan. So set clear objectives. It's impossible to have very clear objectives for our secondary data review if we don't have very clear objective for our assessment. So first, as already Guillermo mentioned, based in the joint analytical framework, based in the variable, based in what the JAF is looking for, what is operation need, we need to establish the objective of our assessment. When we have the objective of our assessment, we can establish the objective of our secondary data review. Guillermo already mentioned that some of them can be to identify gaps, to understand the context. This is probably the two most important, but we can consider other as, for example, to triangulate data that later we are going to collect for primary data collection. Perhaps we don't have enough sampling to do for a representative, and we can later to triangulate the data with finding that we have in the primary data collection. So there are many, apart of the gaps and the context, there are other objectives that we can link to our desk review. The second one, we know the objective, we need to know exactly what kind of information we are looking for. This is, to clarify which kind of topic we are looking for, which population group, which geographical data, because if we are going to do the secondary data review in an organized way, we need to know exactly what we are looking for. Something important here that I would like to highlight is the time that the time period that our secondary data review is going to cover. So, for example, it's not the same if we are in a situation where nothing has changed in the last year, where probably the assessment that we have used or we have, implement or another organization has implemented in the last year can be useful, that if we are in a situation where there has been a crisis, an emergency, something has changed in the last 3 months. So we need to consider the time of period that we are coming for our secondary data review. On this, it's important to consider our resources too. So based on that, we need to determine what are the resources that we need for our secondary data review, how many people we need, the time, the tools. So it's always possible to do a secondary data review. We don't always need 10 people, a very complicated software, or 3 months to do the secondary data review. But it's important that first, we are realistic about what we have. And second, we consider that secondary data review is as important as the primary data collection. So if we are going to plan to do a big assessment with a big primary data collection, thinking to collect all this data, we need to ensure that we invest time and resources in the secondary data review. And it's important if people who are going to work in the whole process, especially in the primary data collection later, is involved in the secondary data review and understand, what we are looking for and which are the findings. So the second step is to collect the data. So different for primary data. Here we are going to collect data that we already have or other partners have already collected, or is the government. So we need to locate this data. Usually for that, we have an assessment registry. Some organizations, they have that, interagency level, OCHA, wherever. We can see what we have. We can even, go to organizations that they already do secondary data review as ACAPs, that, perhaps they have information that we don't have. So we locate what we want. Later, we need to organize our data. So for this, we need to categorize this data. The data need to be categorized based in the information needs that we are looking for. So again, the topics, the population group, the geographical area. And here I would like to highlight the issue that usually we face with qualitative data, because it's very easy, or it's quite easy to categorize the quantitative data information because we can use the indicator, for example, but it's quite difficult, to work with qualitative data. On this, my recommendation will be always to tag the information. It's not necessary to use very complex software to tag the information. When I mean to tag the information is to classify the information based in subtopic. For example, if in the JAF, it is important for us to know about the legal framework, we can tag our qualitative information based in this topic, in this tagging, which is a legal framework, and we can do that in the Excel, we can do it in the PDF, but that will help later when we will do the finding, to filter all the information that is linked to legal framework and be able, to summarize this finding and see which are the gaps. The next point is we need to know the usability of the sorry, of the document, of the data, if it's relevant, not. That I will not say too much because my colleague Sahan will explain later, but it's important to consider, especially if it's bias, the methodology, the sampling. So later, when we will have all this, we are going to describe. This is the first part of the analysis. So keep in mind that all these 3 steps before allow us to prioritize. So we have, for example, 10 assessments. From these 10 assessments, we have 5 which are key for our information need. And from these 5, we have 3 which are the priority. So based on this, based on the categorization, based on the tagging, we can do our key findings, The way that we disaggregate the key finding, again, is linking to the information needs. So we need to know the population group, because it could be that we have some information about one specific population group in protection or in a specific need that we don't have in another group. And that is something that will help us later to identify the gaps. The third is to draw conclusion. When we have the finding, we need to share this finding with the expert. We need to verify this finding. We need to interpret this finding. So for this, the best is to do a joint analysis. Again, that depends on the resources. We can do a workshop. We can do only a meeting. If we don't have time, we can share that with the cluster, and ask them for additional information. The 2 important things that I would like to highlight here is, first, it's important after that to draw some conclusion and not stop only in the finding. Try to do some interpretation. And the second is select what is surprising, Don't eliminate information because you consider that it is not valid. Often we think that we know what is happening in the field. This is the vulnerable camp. This is not the vulnerable camp. And it could be that our secondary data review give us other information that we consider that is not accurate, is not wrong. Keep it and try to see why. If you are not able, keep it for the primary data collection. Invest time to see why that is different, because this is the important thing on assessment. Sometimes, we know already many of the things, but there are things that we are going to be surprised. So we need to identify this one. I think my colleague Guillermo will provide you an example later on this. So I think you will understand much better. So the last point is to identify the gaps. Now that we have the finding, and we know the information that we have been able to find with the secondary data review, the thing that we have to do is to compare with the information needs. This, for example, if you have done your exercise in Excel, is very easy because you can identify the topics, the population group, the geographical area where you have not been able to identify any information. And that will inform your primary data collection. Last point is to share the information, so we always recommend to share the report, to share with the colleagues the limitation of your report based on the assessment, based on your resources. And something that I think is important, I would like to highlight here is, if you are able to share with the cluster, share with other partners, the way that you organize the data, the way that you are doing your secondary data review, that can be useful for another colleagues who are going to do secondary data review, who are going to update the secondary data review, who are going to continue doing the work. So I think that will be a good practice. Is of all them put a little effort on this. I think the secondary data review can be much easier because sometimes we can use secondary data review that has been already done by other colleagues, as for example, usually we do with the secondary data review done by ACAPs. So only to summarize, that will be the tips for the secondary data review. First, most important, plan your secondary data review, very clear the objective of your assessment, so very clear the objective of your secondary data review and which are your information needs. Balance the time and importance, It's very important to do a secondary data review, but you need to balance the time in the assessment that you have. Give priority to the most important assessment, spend more time in the information that you think are more relevant, that can be more tricky. Do not harm. I didn't say that about this, but it's the same that in primary data collection, probably we will have access to personal data, UNHCR database, WFP database. So we need to keep in mind that we always have to do the secondary data review with in mind the idea to do not harm. So if it's necessary, you can establish some shared protocol to exchange this data. Use the quality of the data. That is something that my colleague Sahan will explain later. And the next one is, as much as possible, try to update the secondary data review. We all know that this is quite challenging, but at least, if we are able to update the assessment registry and perhaps, to add some columns with some topics, with some categories that will help us later to do the secondary data review, I think that will facilitate a lot our tasks. Thank you, and I pass the word to Olivia. Over.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you. And everyone here today, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll have time for the presenters to answer questions at the end. So let's look at the sources now. What sources could be used in a data review and a desk review, sorry. And I'm going to launch another poll. So in your opinion, what sources could be used in a desk review? Assessments, previous assessments, data and reports, registration data, qualitative data, quantitative data, data from, spelling mistake, unverifiable sources, complaints, previous complaints and feedback mechanism data, and post-distribution monitoring data. Please click those sources which you think would be appropriate to look at in a secondary data review. And responses coming in. Just give you a minute to respond. Okay, interesting. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Sahand to talk more about sources that can be used.
Okay, thank you so much, Olivia. Hello, everyone. Yeah, just before we go into the sources and talk about them, I'd see in the poll, a lot of the people are ticked the right answers. There was only one of them which was incorrect, data from unverifiable sources, which we usually recommend not to consider those because if you don't know the source of the information, highly likely it could be false or it could be inaccurate. So yeah, I think most people tick the correct answers. So to go before we talk about the secondary data sources, we need to talk about what consideration and what things we need to keep in mind for selecting those sources to be our data sources. I think the first thing is the relevance. So the source that we choose, they have to be relevant to the objectives of the assessment or the review that we want to achieve. Second thing that is also very important, has to be credible, like coming from a source that we can verify. Otherwise, there's no way we can know this information is correct or not. Other thing is accuracy is also very important, that the accuracy of the information is correct, and also like you could test this by looking through the report and see if the information between different parts of the report match, and also it also match with other report in the same category. Timeliness is also another aspect, that the time frame of the report has to be relevant to the current context. I mean, you wouldn't want to look at the report about the number of refugees in country X from 20 years ago if there's newer reports available. And as well, there's something that's also very, very important is the methodology and comparability. One thing that is also good to keep in mind here is that when we talk about methodology, the way that the assessment or the report was done, for example, if a representative sampling was used or not, because if representative sampling was used, highly likely you can generalize the findings to the total population, while if it's not representative, the results are only indicative. And also comparability is also very important, because you have different topics, and sometimes when you are looking at the different reports, the same word or the same parameter could be used differently. So you need to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, not different. That's because the words are similar doesn't mean they mean the same thing. Also, it's also good to check for bias and objectivity. And last, also consent and privacy as well is very important, that you have the right to share this information and use this information, whether it's internally, externally. You have to be able to get the consent from the author of the data and be able to share, or at least they allow you to share with other members or other organizations. To delve a bit deeper about the types, or what is a data source or secondary data source, when we say the secondary data source, we are talking about data sets and reports from previous assessments, previous surveys, registration, and anything that gives information about the topic you're interested in. Other thing could be program monitoring, usually have information that is relevant to the objectives, participatory and community feedback. That could also be another source, and as well as actually any credible source or any source that have a good characteristic, the ones that we discussed in the previous slide, could be actually a data source for your desk review, as long as they're credible and have all the other characteristics. And we have some examples. So this is coming from the joint analytical framework. So based on our experience and our knowledge working with the different country offices, we identified some of these key documents that we thought it was relevant to the objectives of the joint analytical framework. From UNHCR, you usually have the progress database, which gives you information about demographics, PSN, and so on. And and you have joint assessment missions, you have participatory assessment, PDMs, and as well as from the WFP, you have vulnerability assessment, essential need assessments, and appeals, and so on. And you have other types of assessments, such as MSNAs, minimum expenditure basket analysis, as well as World Bank and IPC, and so on. So there's a very wide range of documents available from both UNHCR and WFP and many other organizations that could be used as a secondary data source for this review. And just to give you an example of where do we derive these sources from, actually, it's not arbitrary. Actually, they are all connected to the joint analytical framework, as I mentioned, but we analyze the environment, the national environment, the community setting, and household characteristics, and ability to meet basic needs. So these are our levels of analysis, and our documents that we come up with are part of these different pillars of the joint analytical framework. So for national environment, we have these. I will not go through all of them for the sake of time, but for national environment, we have these variables. We have some for community, we have household characteristics and basic needs. And just to say that these are the entire variables that are part of the framework. However, when in practice, usually the country offices need to agree on what is the objective of the mission and also which ones are actually relevant for their objectives, and they can choose from. And the desk review can only focus on those variables only, not the entire set of objectives, which is very important. And just to say one last thing before I hand over to Guillermo, usually the national environment, we solely during the joint analytical framework, we rely on secondary data sources where for community household characteristics and ability to meet basic needs, we tend to do primary data collection. However, we still need to do desk review for those as well so that we get an understanding of what is the situation like and also create a benchmark. Okay, thank you so much. I hand over to Guillermo to take us through the examples.
Thank you, Sahand. So now we would like to give you a couple of examples on how specifically can a desk review inform a needs assessment built around the JAF. So bear with me. We're going to tell you a couple of stories now. Example number one. Imagine we are planning to conduct a joint needs assessment in a region where 5 refugee camps are located. The first thing we have done, of course, is to conduct a desk review. This desk review has informed us that the area around one of these camps is exposed to much higher levels of communal conflict, which seems to be affecting as well the markets in the area. We know this can have an effect on the vulnerability levels that we want to measure in the coming household survey. So we decide to include in the questionnaire some questions on safety and security and on access to markets as well. Questions we might not have included otherwise. After we conduct the household survey and we look at the data, we see that the vulnerability levels in that one camp more affected by conflict has much higher levels of vulnerability. The vulnerability levels are much higher, as I'm saying. So thanks to the desk review, we have now more information to interpret and understand this data. This is one very typical example we face, and one of the ways we use the desk review more often to build the tools and the planning of the needs assessment lately. Another example. Now imagine you are in another country, planning again for a joint needs assessment, this time with the aim to update the targeting strategy of the refugee population. We started again by conducting a desk review. Nothing new about this. Now, by conducting this desk review, we have identified that the registration data in progress, UNHCR registration database, was outdated. And we realized this is a problem because we were considering using the registration database to update the targeting strategy. So the teams come together and agree that a verification of the registration data is needed before we can review the targeting strategy. The joint needs assessment is then put on hold until the verification has taken place. These are two examples from our experience. There are many others, but we hope they give you a better practical understanding on how useful a desk review can be to inform what is coming next. And now to wrap up, how can a desk review inform a JAF data collection analysis? Well, we've seen both from Alicia and Sahand, thank you for that, very important points on why this is important. On the data collection, more coming again to more practical terms, on the data collection and on the data analysis for the JAF. On the data collection, we've seen that the desk review can help us understand what the knowledge gap is and therefore which additional data we need to collect in the data collection. So accordingly, we can build the analysis plan with the specific indicators that we now know we need, the questionnaire with the relevant questions related to these indicators, the sampling strategy even. Once we know which specific populations and which specific regions we want to have representative data for. And secondly, on the data analysis, we've already seen this. The desk review can help us get a good understanding of the local context with which we can analyze and interpret better the data collected. So we just wanted to reinforce those 2 points. This is again all from my side. Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you, Guillermo. And just as we come to the end of the presentation, I'd just like to point out that we have the website, the JAF website. It's on the Joint Hub website, where you can see all the JAF tools, including the process document, which is a long list of possible sources that Sahand mentioned. And also there's an Excel file with a list of all the variables, many of which are optional, but that you can choose from when doing an assessment or using the JAF. So I've popped the website in the chat. And then, so this webinar, this learning lab is part of a series of 6 learning labs. This is the second one. The next one will be in a couple of weeks on 14th of Feb, Valentine's Day, quantitative data collection and analysis. And you can sign up for all of these learning labs on the same JAF website. Thank you very much. Now we have time for questions. All of our contacts are here. Please do get in touch if you have questions after the webinar as well. Please do get in touch, but we do have some time for questions now. So I see a couple of questions in the chat. We can share the presentations, certainly. After this, we can share the presentations with you. There's a question. Okay, there's Alicia, would you like to say anything about limitations and content validity? I see there's a question from Ringo on that.
Yes, but I don't know, I already mentioned that the limitations are more linking to the limitation of the secondary data review. So first there is, between bracket, the limitation of the document or the validity of the document, that it is something that you should measure during the process. But after there are some limitations which are more linking to the whole exercise, for example, the resources that you have, the time that you have, if in general, the assessment were not done with a representative sampling, or yes, or if this was some bias. So this is something important to keep in mind when you are going to do the report, not only to, checklist the limitation of the specific resources, but the limitation of the whole. And there is another question from Ringo that I was not able. He was asking, would you advise on instrument design quality and quantity on a sectorial and population basic? I was asking if he's asking about tools, because I don't know exactly if this is the question.
Ringo he's raised his hand. I don't know, Ringo, do you want to just explain briefly your question? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to and just explain briefly this question. No. All right, he's not unmuting himself. I don't know.
From that, yes, that's
yes,
right. Well,
Ringo,
thanks,
great.
Olivia and colleagues.
Go
I
ahead.
think this is a presentation that is very rich and deep. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you, yeah. Please go ahead. Oh, we could hear
Can
you,
hear
now
me,
we
colleagues?
can't. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, just to appreciate the depth and content of the presentation. But I wanted to quickly say that there is a challenge around the quality of questions that have to be answered, and that is by any evaluation, whether they are tracking relevance up to sustainability, whatever it is. And that does not exclude a desk review from also addressing that, particularly as a complementary line of evidence. So I wanted to learn from you based on experience in this session is, do you have any advice around the design aspect of the questionnaires in terms of quality, in terms of quantity across sectors? Maybe you're looking at human settlement, you're looking at protection, you're looking at post-distribution monitoring, you're looking at refugees, IDPs. So this is exactly what I want to find out. But before I could go off, just to take the platform and also say, one other area that I think is of great interest here is on the objectives. I think that aspect of triangulating and strengthening the using desk review for purpose of triangulating and strengthening other lines of evidence should also be underscored, because remember, a desk review is usually for your entry level, but you also need to complement it with other evaluation or monitoring methods, like you talked about sampling, you talked about the questionnaires, all those kind of things. But again, it's a silent and passive way, because its only strength arises to the extent to which the evaluator or the person responsible for that can engage with the text in terms of, engage with the secondary sources in terms of text, in terms of content, and in terms of critical thinking. Over. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to hand over to Guillermo to respond.
Yes, thank you, Olivia, and thank you, Ringo. I wanted to mention that if I understood the question well about the quality of the questions for the assessment, right, and the quality of the questions will be including in the questionnaire, I wanted to highlight that we have 2 more sessions coming in 2 weeks and in 4 weeks, focusing precisely on this, on the design of the quantitative questionnaire, household survey type of, and on the design of the qualitative data collection, more focused discussions, key inform and interviews. And in these 2 sessions, we'll be focusing on a number of things: analysis plan, how to capture well, which indicators are needed, but also on the type of questions and the way to frame them to make sure they have the quality required. Okay, so I will postpone the answer to those webinars, if you agree. Thank you, Ringo.
Thank you, Guillermo.
No, thank you so very much. And finally, one thing that may not have been come out is, on the disseminating the findings, I think you could also touch on the aspect on key lessons learned. Key lessons learned. That is also particular for desk reviews, because you can also draw critical lessons to inform key decisions. And I think this has helped quite a lot in Sudani.
Thanks. Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Sahand, would you like to say something? Over.
Yeah, I mean, I accidentally raised my hand, but I can just speak to, I think, what Ringo was mentioning as well. I think these are all the why we are also importance of doing desk review. It can inform multiple things, right? It can inform our design of questionnaire. It can inform more decision making. So that's why we are also emphasizing the importance of doing it. And thank you for your contribution. Over.
Right. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes left. I don't know, Guillermo, Alicia, or Sahand, if you would like to say anything else before we close. Anything that we haven't fully covered, you think that you'd like to say? Yeah, Guillermo, go ahead, and then we'll close up.
Just very quickly, also from the questions, to insist on the fact that we were trying to outline the way and the importance of conducting a desk review in the framework of the JAF. So thinking on how the 2 agencies can apply this joint analytical framework in the context of a joint needs assessment. Of course, desk reviews go way beyond that. They're important for any type of assessment, actually, or evaluation in any type of sector. Even before starting any program, we were trying to restrain ourselves to this question relates to the JAF, and also to wrap up. Also hearing your questions on what we try to convey in this session, which is the importance of the desk review. The desk review is something that, in our experience in the field, is sometimes neglected, or let's say less importance is given to this file. And we believe it is very important. It can influence very much all the other steps of the assessment. It can improve the quality of what comes next, and it can avoid important errors. So just to insist on the importance of allocating some resources to do this, even if we know that we often go quick and dirty for how reality works in our settings. But just to highlight that this is an important step, even if neglected often. Just wanted to highlight that. Over from my side.
Thank you. Alicia, would you like to say a last word as we close?
Yes, only to complement what Guillermo said, and something that I have not mentioned before is not always we have to start the secondary data review from zero. always remember, that there are sectors, that probably they have been already working in some secondary data review for their assessment. Think that they have organization, like ACAPS that is always working in secondary data review, and you can contact, it's not only what is available on the website, you can even contact them and ask them if they have a specific data from some specific that go to OCHA. Sometimes OCHA, they have an overview about everyone, so perhaps they can help you and provide you with some data. So not always you need to start from zero and from scratch. Sometimes, secondary data review is already done and you only need to find, what you are looking for. Over, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll wrap up now. If you have additional questions, please do email us, or you can write a question in the chat. We can try to respond offline, and we will send the presentation both for the first and second webinar to everyone who registered. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope to see you again this time in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.